And we celebrate Easter like those early disciples. We celebrate Easter not at an empty tomb, but we celebrate Easter at a table. See, Jesus walked into that room of those first disciples, you and I, and they were scared. They were doubtful. They were weary. They were disbelieving. They were hungry for some certainty and some surety and clarity. I imagine there was a hope in there that Jesus would explain the mechanism of the resurrection. Right? That Jesus would tell them how it is possible that they can recognize him but also not recognize him at the same time. How is it that he is flesh and bones yet walks through a closed door? How is it that that can touch him but not cling to him? Jesus does not answer that part of their hunger. But he does what he has done so often. He sits at the table. And he shares a meal. He shares communion of fellowship. In the Gospel of Luke, right before we get to this particular instance that I just read of the disciples in the upper room in which Jesus comes, we have the story of the road to Emmaus, where Jesus joins two friends on the road and has this conversation and works to open their minds to understand what's going on. But they don't recognize Jesus until later. The understanding of the implications of the resurrection did not come through the jibber-jabber. The understanding for the implications of the resurrection came through a moment of shared gifts. It came through a moment of shared conversation. It came in a moment of openness of all who were gathered around the table. This is what we are witnesses to. The meal that is set before us, the chairs that are sitting empty, the opportunity to be with one another is what we are to be witnesses to. We know how to do it. Thankfully, in the Gospels, right, Jesus gave us lots of examples of the importance of the meal. Jesus gave us all kinds of opportunities to learn, to know what to do. See, Jesus set up a lot of tables when he was active in Galilee and in Jerusalem. He was known to set up tables in which people could gather and share and give. Do you remember that time he set up a table? Invited a tax collector to come? One of those despised by their neighbors, hated. Jesus set a table. He invited others to come and have that moment of communion, that moment of Openness. And in that moment, that tax collector's eyes were opened. He found an understanding. He found acceptance. He found belonging. You remember that time when Jesus set a table for a woman? And in that moment, she had the opportunity to be loved, to be cared for, to know that she's not forgotten. How about, do you remember that time he set a table for a Pharisee? Right? That opportunity to gather, to fellowship with one another, to share a meal with another with a differing understanding. That moment of challenging, that moment of profound enlightening. Do you remember that meal that Jesus set out in the park? Really more of a picnic than a meal, where he made room for hundreds and thousands. Where everybody had a place. And Jesus himself, he offered them what they were seeking. He offered them loaves. And fish. Seems to me this is the implication of the resurrection. It seems to me that if God was searching for some show of power and might, that if God was searching for some opportunity to show omnipotence, that Jesus would have showed up at Pilate's house, that Jesus would have showed up at Caiaphas, that Jesus would have showed up at that Sanhedrin council and waved his finger in their face. But it seems to me that the implication of the resurrection is not a show of power, but it is a show of openness. It's a show of invitation. It's a show of opportunity to gather, to give of one another. I don't know about you, but some of the most profound and life-changing moments in my life came around a dinner table. When I was growing up, when I was a child, the dinner table every night at exactly 5:15 was the moment, was a life-changing moment. It was at that dinner table within that family framework that I found my identity. I found my meaning. I found my purpose. We know, right? As you think about your family meal times, how sacred that is. How tender that is. Barb and I tried to replicate that for our children. Of course, Barb had that same experience in her house around the dinner table. It was in the sharing of the meal that I got to know my kids. I got to know their fears. I got to know their questions. I got to know their doubts. I got to know their strengths. Our meal times were wonderful times. We shared a lot of laughs around that dinner table growing up with the kids. We still do when we have the opportunity to gather. We shared a lot of tears around that dinner table. Shared some deep conversations. Because it just seems that when you're at the dinner table, there just seems to be that atmosphere, right? I don't know if it's because of the aroma of what was ever baking, but you just seem to be in an attitude or a sense of openness, of a sense of vulnerability to one another. Profound things happen around the dinner table. We learn from one another. We converse with one another. We find Christ as we gather. And we are witnesses. Right? You are witnesses to these things. You are witness to that opportunity that is placed before you to set your own table. Like Jesus, not to explain the rules, not to explain how the mechanisms of the resurrection work, but an opportunity to sit. To know. To converse. Church is pretty good about setting tables, aren't we? Right? Every Wednesday night we set a table for the community. An opportunity to love and to care. But one of the questions I always have when we set our tables of fellowship, are we ever going to have enough chairs? Are we ever going to have enough table space? I'm not worried about how much food there is, right? That's just secondary. But how many opportunities are there? Who are we inviting? We are witnesses to these things. To share the implications of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the implications of the resurrection is a verification of the gospel. Not of God's power and God's might and God's ability to do whatever. The implications of the resurrection is a verification of Jesus' mission and ministry. To remind us the importance of the gathering. To remind us of the importance of one another. To remind us that maybe somebody at the table is that tax collector, that woman, that Pharisee who needs that profound moment in their life. We never know. But it never happens if they're not there. Now, you all know, right? As I'm going through this, that the meal is at the same time a metaphor and not a metaphor. Okay? It's not a metaphor in this sense, in that in the real physicality of the table, things do happen. I remember one of the churches I belonged to, they had a retired pastor who I did not like much. He just seemed pompous to me and rude. I stayed out of his way. Until we came to a time at the pastor's Christmas party, they stuck us at the same card table. The audacity of that pastor to do that to me. It's that time that we sat at a card table that I overcame whatever it was that was blocking me from loving that gentleman. I don't know what his thoughts of me ever were. That doesn't really matter, but it matters to me what my thoughts of him were. And it was in that shared meal over a Christmas Eve at the pastor's house that I learned how to love through my biases. And it's not a metaphor in this sense. If we learn anything from this past year, if we learn anything from this pandemic, it is that we do not have to be in a physical presence with one another to share the presence of Jesus Christ. That as we set our tables, it is just a table of openness. It's a willingness to converse with somebody somewhere, whether that's on social media, in the grocery store, walking down the sidewalk. It's a willingness to begin a relationship with somebody that you would not have otherwise. You'll notice it takes some effort to make a table. It doesn't just happen. We have to set the opportunity there. Not wait for the opportunity to come to us, but to open ourselves to the opportunity in whatever moment that is. We are witnesses to these things. In this metaphor or not metaphor, there is giving. There is giving. We set before others a gift. Whether it's a beautiful gift of bread that Linda has shared with us today, or it's just the gift of ourselves, right? Of letting ourselves be open and vulnerable to the others. And through that, we offer the gift of Jesus Christ. That gift of love. That gift of grace. That gift of peace, of belonging, of acceptance. Sometimes we sit at the table with people we don't necessarily like. Sometimes we sit at a table with people whom we would not otherwise invite. And we're good at that, right? We're good at not inviting others. We're good at separating the children to the children's table and the adults to the adult table, or the Democrats to the Democrat table, the Republicans to the Republican table, the liberals to the liberal table, the conservatives to the conservative table. We're pretty good at dividing our tables. But it doesn't seem to me that that is being a witness to Jesus Christ. It doesn't seem to me that that is offering the opportunity of the implication of the resurrection, of sharing in love and grace. The church, the disciples of Jesus Christ, followers of the movement, we are to be witnesses of these things, of invitation, of hospitality, of gathering, of giving, and most importantly, of loving. Jesus has shown us how. He set lots of tables with lots of different kinds of people. We can do the same, or more of the same. I love a good meal, don't get me wrong. And I love the comfort food that Lynn provides us every Wednesday night, right? That comfort food that just seems to take care of that hunger, not just of the belly, but that hunger of the mind, that hunger of some sense of surety. But we have found in this past year there is a lot of hunger out there. There is a hunger to know one another better. There is a hunger to know God better. There is a hunger for some peace in this world. And that'll come if we set the table. Amen.